The studio lights blazed like a spotlight on a stage of confrontation. Cameras rotated, capturing every angle of the live audience's eager faces. And at the center of it all, Jonathan Roumie sat calm, composed, almost serene, while across from him, Behar's eyes narrowed in sharp curiosity. It had started like any other segment on the show, but everyone watching, both in the studio and at home, could feel the tension building instantly. The chatter from the crew was hushed, almost drowned by the hum of anticipation from the audience. Something about today's interaction was different. Something about the air itself seemed charged. Joy leaned forward, her hand resting on the edge of the table. "Jonathan," she began, her voice carrying that signature mix of skepticism and authority, "people see the Bible as just another entertainment series. They say it's dramatic, it's captivating, sure, but how can you say it changes lives? How can you claim your role has that kind of impact?" A ripple passed through the crowd. A few camera flashes from audience phones blinked, trying to capture the moment, the intensity in the air, the unspoken tension. Jonathan Roumie didn't flinch. His hands rested gently on his lap, and a small, calm smile touched his lips. There was no defensiveness, no sharp retort, only a quiet confidence that seemed almost otherworldly in contrast to the force of Joy's challenge. The audience held its collective breath. Even the production crew, trained to remain unseen, leaned slightly closer to their monitors, sensing that this was one of those rare moments when something larger than a simple interview was unfolding. The energy in the room was electric, a mixture of skepticism and curiosity, tension and expectation. Joy's tone sharpened. "I mean, people argue over history, over faith, over how this story is interpreted. And yet here you are, claiming it's more than a story, that it actually inspires people to live differently. Aren't you overstepping?" Jonathan's gaze didn't waver. "Sometimes," he said softly, "the world is quick to doubt what it doesn't understand. And impact doesn't always announce itself loudly. Often, it is quiet, subtle, but powerful in ways that touch hearts, not just minds." A hush fell over the room. Even the usual murmur of shifting chairs and coughs from the audience faded into near silence. Everyone could feel the weight of his words, the unexpected calm in the face of challenge. For a moment, it seemed like time itself slowed. People weren't just watching a conversation, they were witnessing a lesson in poise, humility, and quiet authority. Joy's eyes flickered, a mix of surprise and contemplation. The lines of skepticism on her face softened, but she didn't yet fully surrender her doubts. "All right," she said slowly, almost reluctantly, "let's see if your words match your actions." And with that, the stage was set. The confrontation that no one expected had begun, and the lesson that would follow would leave an impression far deeper than anyone in the studio, or watching from home, could have imagined. The cameras continued to roll, their red live lights glowing steadily, marking every second of the unfolding drama. The studio, normally filled with laughter, applause, and chatter, felt different today. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, as though everyone, audience, crew, and even the cameras themselves, could feel that this segment would be remembered. Jonathan Roumie sat in his chair, calm and composed. His posture was upright but relaxed, hands folded neatly in his lap. Every so often, a small, thoughtful smile curved his lips, almost imperceptible, yet it carried a quiet assurance that commanded attention without demanding it. His presence was magnetic, but subtle. It wasn't the flashy charisma of a celebrity trying to dominate a talk show. It was the calm authority of someone who knew exactly who he was and why he was there. Across from him, Behar leaned forward, elbows on the polished desk, fingers tapping lightly in a rhythm that matched the rapid-fire pace of her questions. Her signature wit and sharp tongue were evident as she began her interrogation, not just of Jonathan, but of the very idea of the Bible series itself. She wasn't here to flatter or to entertain. She was here to challenge. "Jonathan," she started, her voice cutting through the hum of the studio, "you've taken on the role of one of the most recognized figures in history. Millions have seen portrayals of Jesus, and yet here you are, saying your version can actually inspire people, change lives. Isn't that a bit presumptuous?" The audience murmured. Some nodded in agreement, some shook their heads subtly, and a few leaned forward, eager to see Jonathan's response. This was not just another talk show segment. This was a battle of perception, skepticism against calm conviction. Jonathan's eyes met hers steadily, unshaken. "It's not about being presumptuous," he said softly, almost like a teacher speaking to a student. "It's about responsibility. The stories we tell, the roles we embody, they have power, whether we intend it or not. And that power can touch people in ways that we often don't see immediately." A hush fell over the room. Even the usual background noises of cameras adjusting, crew members whispering, and audience shifting in their seats seemed to vanish. For a moment, every eye was on Jonathan. Every ear hung on his words. There was a quiet electricity in the studio, a sense that something profound was unfolding. Joy's expression didn't soften immediately. She raised an eyebrow, still skeptical but curious. "People watch the show for drama, entertainment, not necessarily for life lessons," she said. "How can you be sure that your performance actually has this kind of impact?" Jonathan tilted his head slightly, the studio lights catching the calm glint in his eyes. "You can't measure impact by ratings or applause alone," he replied. "Sometimes, the smallest gestures, the quietest moments, are the ones that resonate the most. I've had viewers write to me, sharing how a single scene, a single word, even a pause, changed how they treated their family, their friends, or even strangers. That's impact." The audience shifted in their seats, whispering to each other. Phones quietly recorded, capturing the unexpected depth of the conversation. Some of the crew exchanged glances, realizing that this wasn't just a celebrity interview. It was a teaching moment unfolding in real time. Joy leaned back slightly, letting the words settle, a slight furrow softening in her brow. She took a breath, her tone gentler but still probing. "So, you're saying it's not about the fame or the recognition. It's about the connection, the responsibility, the meaning behind the role itself." Jonathan nodded. "Exactly. When you step into a story that carries the weight of history, faith, and culture, you do so with humility. Not arrogance. Not showmanship. You do it with care for the people who will see it, and the lives that might be touched. That's what I try to bring to every scene, every performance." A few audience members quietly nodded, some with small smiles, others with thoughtful expressions. The atmosphere in the studio was slowly shifting. Where there had been skepticism, there was now curiosity. Where there had been tension, there was now reflection. Joy's sharp gaze softened further. She glanced around the audience and back at Jonathan. "I have to admit," she said slowly, almost reluctantly, "I didn't expect it to be this thoughtful. You've clearly considered more than just the role itself. You've thought about the responsibility it carries." Jonathan's lips curled into a gentle, understanding smile. "Responsibility," he said, "is often quieter than we imagine. It doesn't need to shout to be heard." The cameras captured the subtle exchange, the tension diffusing into a calm, reflective moment. It wasn't dramatic or explosive. It was something rarer, respect growing in real time. The audience felt it, the crew felt it, even Joy Behar herself seemed to sense it. And yet, this was only the beginning. Because moments like this, moments where assumptions are challenged, and humility meets wisdom, rarely end quietly. Something bigger, more profound, was about to unfold, and it would leave the studio, and everyone watching, changed in ways they hadn't expected. The studio air grew thicker, charged with a tension that wasn't just professional, it was personal. Joy Behar leaned forward, her sharp eyes locking onto Jonathan Roumie's calm gaze. The audience sensed the collision of two worlds, her skeptical, probing energy versus his serene, measured presence. Every second felt amplified. Every word would matter. Joy's voice cut through the studio like a whip. "Jonathan, forgive me, but millions of people have their own beliefs, their own interpretations of faith. How can you sit here and say that your portrayal, your interpretation, carries authority? Isn't that dangerous?" Jonathan didn't flinch. Not a twitch, not a defensive tilt. He sat like a man who had faced the judgment of the world before, and found it unshakable. "Dangerous," he repeated softly, letting the word hang. Then, almost imperceptibly, he leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "Joy, the only danger lies in pretending that faith, hope, and compassion are entertainment. If you approach these stories carelessly, yes, there's danger. But if you approach them with respect, humility, and intention, there's the potential to change lives." A hush fell over the audience. Some shifted in their seats, leaning forward. Phones were quietly raised, capturing every flicker of emotion on the two faces. The production crew barely breathed, sensing that the energy in the room had shifted from anticipation to something almost electric. Joy's eyes narrowed. She wasn't used to being challenged this way. Her presence, her tone, her questions usually commanded the narrative. But Jonathan wasn't flustered. He wasn't defensive. He was unshakable. And that only made her press harder. So you think people actually take lessons from a TV series? That they're inspired to behave differently, act differently, live differently? Her tone rose, sharp with incredulity. That's a big claim, Jonathan. Aren't you crossing a line between art and life? Jonathan's response was quiet but unwavering. Art imitates life, Joy. And sometimes life imitates art. The stories we tell, even on screen, ripple through hearts, shaping choices, shaping kindness, shaping understanding. You don't see it immediately. You don't always hear about it. But it happens. There was a pause, long enough for tension to build, long enough for the audience to lean forward in collective anticipation. Joy's lips pressed together, her skepticism battling curiosity. A few murmurs passed through the audience. One whisper, "He's calm, but he's hitting hard." Joy's next question was sharper, almost cutting, "But what about criticism? People argue about every detail, every line, every interpretation. How do you handle that? How do you convince them your intentions are pure?" Jonathan's gaze softened, but his voice carried quiet authority. "You don't convince anyone. That's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to embody the role with integrity, to respect the story, to respect the people who will watch it. If criticism comes, let it be a mirror, not a weapon. Listen, learn, but never compromise the core of what you believe to be right." The audience shifted again, some nodding, some whispering to each other. The tension was still palpable, but it had evolved. It wasn't just confrontation anymore. It was an exchange of philosophies, a test of patience and humility. Joy's expression softened slightly, though her voice remained probing. "So, you're saying, it's not about recognition, or fame, or even winning hearts with your performance. It's about responsibility and integrity." Jonathan nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. "Exactly. Responsibility. Integrity. Respect. That's what sustains a story beyond the cameras, beyond the applause, beyond the moment. That's what inspires people to act differently, to treat others with kindness, to reflect on their own lives." The audience murmured again, a mixture of realization and admiration. Even the crew could feel it. The energy in the studio had shifted from conflict to reflection. Joy leaned back slightly, her hands resting lightly on the table, her usual sharpness softened by the weight of his words. She exhaled slowly, almost reluctantly. "I have to admit," she said, softer now, almost quietly, "I didn't expect you to answer like that. I didn't expect it to matter this much." Jonathan's calm smile returned, gentle, unassuming. "Sometimes, the most profound lessons are the quietest," he said. "The ones we learn in moments of tension, not comfort. The ones we carry in our hearts, even when the world doesn't see them." The audience, once tense and brimming with anticipation, now sat in reflective silence. They had witnessed more than an argument. They had witnessed a lesson in humility, patience, and quiet strength. And as the cameras continued to roll, it became clear. This confrontation was far from over, but the true power wasn't in the clash of voices. It was in the unshakable calm that commanded respect. The studio felt almost surreal after Jonathan Roumie's calm, unwavering response. The tension that had gripped the room moments ago didn't vanish, it transformed. It was no longer the clash of skepticism and conviction. It was a collective pause, a quiet reflection that spread from the stage to the audience, even through the cameras. Joy Behar, usually quick with her wit and ready with the next sharp remark, sat back slowly, her fingers resting lightly on the polished table. Her sharp gaze softened, the corners of her eyes crinkling slightly, not with humor, but with contemplation. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected that a calm, measured voice could silence both the doubt in her own mind and the buzz of the live audience in one fell swoop. Some audience members shifted in their seats, whispering to their neighbors. "Did you hear that?" One muttered, eyes wide. "He's right. He makes sense." A few others nodded, phones discreetly recording, capturing not just the words but the tone, the presence, the quiet authority that seemed to fill the room. The production crew, trained to remain invisible, couldn't help but lean slightly closer to the monitors. Even behind the cameras, they felt the weight of the moment. Something had happened on set that transcended normal television. This wasn't just an interview. This was a lesson, unfolding in real time, and everyone watching, on the set or through their screens, was part of it. Joy finally spoke, her voice slower, almost hesitant. "Jonathan, I have to admit, I didn't expect this. I thought this would be a simple discussion about the show. But what you're saying, it's deeper than I thought. It's not just about acting or portraying a role. It's about responsibility, about meaning." Jonathan nodded, eyes calm, smile gentle. "Exactly. We can't always control how people perceive us or our work. But we can control the intention behind it. We can approach it with respect and integrity. That's the difference between a fleeting performance and a lasting impact." A soft murmur of agreement traveled through the audience, almost like a tide spreading slowly but steadily. People were leaning forward now, some gripping the edge of their seats, some tilting their heads, eyes fixed on Jonathan as though trying to absorb every word. Even the studio lights seemed to feel the shift, casting a softer glow over the scene. Joy's usual bravado softened completely. She exhaled slowly, her sharp edges rounded by reflection. I guess sometimes we forget that entertainment can carry real lessons," she admitted, her tone quieter than usual, almost vulnerable. "We see it as spectacle, but it can teach. It can inspire. And maybe I've been too quick to judge." Jonathan's response was simple but resonant. "Judgment is easy. Understanding is harder. But the quiet moments, the moments when someone listens, not just hears, are where real change begins." The audience felt it. Even the skeptics were leaning in, nodding subtly. Some wiped away small tears, moved not by drama or performance, but by a truth that had quietly unfolded before them. Phones hovered mid-air, capturing the moment, but it felt almost secondary. The real recording was happening in hearts, in minds, in reflections sparked quietly yet powerfully. One older audience member, sitting near the front, whispered to the neighbor beside him, "I came expecting entertainment. But this feels like a sermon I didn't know I needed." The neighbor nodded slowly, eyes wide, as if realizing the same thing. Joy Behar, for her part, finally leaned forward, resting her elbows again on the table. Her sharpness had not vanished entirely, it had transformed. It was now curiosity, an openness to see beyond the immediate, beyond the assumptions. "Jonathan," she said, softer but firm, I think I understand now. Not completely, perhaps, but enough to see that this is bigger than I imagined." Jonathan gave a small, reassuring nod. "It is bigger. And it's not about fame or recognition. It's about responsibility, humility, and the impact we leave behind in the lives of others. That's the real story." The cameras captured the subtle shift in Joy's posture, the softened expressions of the audience, the quiet nods of the crew. The energy in the studio had moved from confrontation to reflection, from skepticism to contemplation. It was a rare transformation, one that doesn't happen often on live television. And yet, even in this quiet reflection, the audience could feel that the story was far from over. The lesson was beginning to take root, but the reveal, the moment when the full truth, the ultimate realization, would hit, was still approaching. The atmosphere, now charged with anticipation and newfound respect, hinted that the next moments would be unforgettable. Because sometimes, the most powerful lessons come not in the heat of argument, but in the quiet reaction afterward, in the stillness when words have landed, when hearts are stirred, and when reflection begins. And in that quiet, reflective pause, the stage was set. A moment of understanding had taken place, but the true impact was just about to be revealed, and it would leave everyone watching, from the studio to the living rooms at home, forever changed. The studio was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavier than any shout. Every eye was fixed on Jonathan Roumie, and even Joy Behar seemed suspended, her sharp skepticism softened into thoughtful curiosity. But the quiet wasn't meant to last. The next moment would change everything, both on the stage and in the minds of everyone watching. It started with a subtle sound outside the studio doors, a soft but deliberate knocking. The stage manager glanced toward the entrance, confused. Usually, everyone cleared the hallway before a live broadcast. But these footsteps were different, deliberate, confident, unhurried. Jonathan, calm as ever, didn't flinch. His expression remained serene, almost knowing. Joy tilted her head, noticing the brief pause in the crew's movements. "What's happening?" she whispered under her breath, but there was no answer yet. Then the doors opened, and 3 sharply dressed executives entered, carrying a small stack of documents and folders. They moved quickly but respectfully, eyes fixed on Jonathan as if approaching royalty. The audience murmured, some craning their necks to see the new arrivals. Cameras pivoted, capturing every motion. "Mr. Roumie," one of the executives said, voice steady but urgent, "we've been waiting for you, sir." The words hung in the air, and a ripple of confusion passed through the audience. Joy's brows knitted. "Wait. Mr. Roumie," she asked, leaning forward. "You mean, this isn't just about the show?" Jonathan's faint smile widened just slightly. "It's bigger," he replied. "Much bigger than a role, a segment, or even this studio. But I think now is the right time for the full truth." The executives handed him the documents. He flipped them open with calm precision. Inside were certificates of ownership, legal documents confirming control, and official notices. The room seemed to tilt slightly under the weight of the revelation. Joy's jaw dropped almost imperceptibly. "Oh my, is this real?" she whispered, now fully attentive. Jonathan looked directly at her, his voice quiet but resolute. "Yes. I am the new majority owner of the company that funds and produces the Bible series. I am responsible not just for portraying this story, but for guiding its entire mission. And that includes making decisions that affect this studio, these crews, and the people who trust us to tell the story correctly." The audience gasped. Phones that had been recording now zoomed in, capturing every facial reaction, the shock, the disbelief, the awe. Even the production crew exchanged stunned glances, a few whispered under their breath, hardly believing the revelation themselves. Joy's voice trembled slightly, caught between disbelief and admiration. "Wait, so, the calm, humble man I've been debating, he's the owner?" Jonathan nodded. "I came here not to intimidate, not to impress, and certainly not to show power. I came to deposit respect, to witness humility, and to remind everyone that authority and influence carry responsibility first and ego second." The audience erupted into murmurs and whispers, some applause breaking out spontaneously, even as the cameras continued to roll. Joy sat back, her expression a mixture of awe, reflection, and a rare humility. She had walked in thinking this would be a typical debate about entertainment, skepticism, and public perception. Instead, she had been confronted not by ego or bravado, but by integrity and quiet authority. Jonathan's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the energy now flooding the studio. "I came to observe," he continued, "to see how respect and humility play out in real life. And what I witnessed today, this discussion, this openness, the willingness to reflect, shows me that people are capable of understanding growth and grace. That is more powerful than any debate, any rating, any applause." Joy leaned forward again, softer now, a subtle nod acknowledging the lesson. I get it now. I didn't realize. The humility, the responsibility, it's real. You've shown me that words can be stronger than arguments." Jonathan smiled faintly. "Sometimes, the lessons we remember are the ones we don't expect to learn. Respect, patience, humility, they are more than virtues. They are the foundation of leadership, influence, and life itself." The audience, caught in the shockwave of revelation, erupted into applause. Some stood, moved not just by the twist, but by the subtle moral that had been laid bare in real time. Phones captured the moment, but the memory lingered far longer than any video ever could. Joy Behar finally exhaled, shaking her head in disbelief. "Wow. Jonathan. I have to say, lesson learned. Loud and clear." Jonathan rose quietly, offering a nod to the entire room. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to celebrate. The impact of his presence, the reveal, and the lesson had spoken for itself. In that moment, authority, respect, and humility all converged, leaving a mark that no live audience, or viewers at home, would soon forget. The studio was still buzzing with quiet disbelief. The revelation that Jonathan Roumie wasn't just an actor, but the majority owner of the company behind the Bible series, had rippled through every corner of the room. Cameras kept rolling, but the energy had shifted from spectacle to reflection. Joy Behar, normally quick with a retort, now sat with her hands clasped on the table, staring at Jonathan as if seeing him for the first time. The edge in her voice had softened completely, replaced with a mixture of admiration and humility. I don't even know what to say, she admitted, her voice quieter than usual. You came here, not to show off, not to assert power, but to teach a lesson. Jonathan's calm smile returned, gentle but firm. Power doesn't need to be loud. Authority doesn't need to demand attention. True influence is quiet. It's in the choices we make, the respect we show, and the responsibility we take, not in winning arguments or asserting status. The audience, who had been leaning forward since the reveal, now broke into murmurs of agreement. Some nodded slowly, some wiped away small tears, others whispered to each other about the lesson they had just witnessed. This wasn't just a shocking revelation, it was a life lesson unfolding live, and it had landed hard. Joy's gaze softened further. Jonathan, I've challenged a lot of people in my career, but I've rarely felt so completely humbled by someone's presence. Not because of what they own, but because of who they are. Jonathan inclined his head slightly. That humility comes from respect. Respect for the work, respect for the people, respect for life itself. That's what sustains a legacy. Not ego, not arrogance, not wealth or position. True respect is earned through consistent, quiet integrity. For a moment, the studio seemed to hold its breath. Even the production crew, hidden behind cameras and monitors, felt the gravity of the words. There was no applause yet, only the lingering weight of realization. Jonathan turned to address the audience directly. You've seen a small demonstration today of how respect, patience, and humility work, not in theory, but in real life. And this is just the beginning. Influence and leadership are not measured by loud actions, but by the lives we touch and the lessons we leave behind. Joy nodded slowly, finally breaking into a small smile. Lesson learned, she said softly. Loud and clear. And trust me, I'll carry it with me. Not just for this show, or for the viewers, but personally. Jonathan's attention shifted to the executives, who had quietly observed the entire exchange. He gave a subtle nod, signaling that the segment had accomplished its purpose. Then, with deliberate calm, he rose from his seat. Cameras captured the movement, but it was almost ceremonial in its quiet dignity. He wasn't celebrating. He wasn't seeking validation. He was simply acting in alignment with the lesson he had just shared. As he walked toward the studio exit, the audience rose slowly, clapping, not in wild, chaotic applause, but in a measured, respectful acknowledgement. Some stood in silent admiration, others cheered softly. Every eye was on Jonathan, not as a celebrity, not as an owner, but as a man who had used a single live segment to convey a profound life lesson. Joy watched him go, a rare moment of reflection in her eyes. I think I've been reminded what it means to lead with humility, she murmured to herself, almost to the audience. And maybe what it really means to listen, instead of argue. Jonathan paused at the doorway, turned once to glance at everyone in the studio, and nodded gently. There was no flourish, no dramatic gesture, just the quiet authority of someone who knew that the impact of a lesson far outweighs the impact of a spectacle. As the doors closed behind him, the studio remained momentarily silent, the applause fading into thoughtful murmurs. The cameras continued rolling, capturing the stunned reactions, the whispered reflections, and the undeniable truth that sometimes the most powerful influence comes not from control or confrontation, but from quiet wisdom, respect, and humility. And in that stillness, the lesson became clear. True leadership isn't declared, it's demonstrated. True respect isn't demanded, it's earned. And the impact of a single, calm presence can resonate far longer than the loudest argument ever could. The studio had quieted, but the energy in the room lingered. The revelation of Jonathan Roumie's dual role, as actor and majority owner, was shocking enough, but the real impact went far beyond that. It wasn't the surprise of power or wealth that had left everyone speechless. It was the quiet, unshakable lesson in humility, respect, and responsibility. Joy Behar, still seated at the desk, leaned back and exhaled slowly. Her sharp eyes, which had once been skeptical and probing, now held something softer, reflection. She had entered the segment ready to challenge, ready to assert authority, ready to provoke reaction. Instead, she had been challenged in the most unexpected way, not by words, not by confrontation, but by calm integrity and quiet authority. Jonathan Roumie had left the room, but his presence remained. It lingered in the audience, in the crew, in the soft murmur of those who were still processing the lesson. What he had shown was simple, yet profound. True power does not shout. True influence is quiet. True respect is earned, not demanded. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't called attention to his status until the moment of reveal. He had simply demonstrated patience, integrity, and understanding in a situation that could easily have turned into spectacle. And in doing so, he had taught a lesson far more impactful than any argument could. The lesson was universal. It wasn't about television or celebrity or even faith. It was about how we treat others when no one is looking, how we respond when challenged, and how we wield influence responsibly. The moment reminded everyone watching, whether in the studio or at home, that humility is a strength, and respect is the foundation of meaningful leadership. Joy finally addressed the audience, her voice softer, yet full of conviction. "We all walk into situations thinking we know the answers," she said, "thinking our perspective is right. But today, I've learned something important. Sometimes, the person you underestimate, the one you challenge, has a lesson you didn't expect, but needed to hear." A few audience members nodded quietly, others whispered agreements to their neighbors. Phones captured these reactions, but the real moment was in the hearts and minds of those present. They had witnessed a lesson in patience, calm authority, and respect, a lesson they wouldn't forget. Jonathan's final act, walking out quietly, letting his words, actions, and demeanor speak louder than any showmanship, cemented the moral. True influence isn't about control or spectacle. It's about demonstrating integrity, respecting others, and embodying humility even when it isn't noticed. So here's the takeaway for everyone watching. Respect isn't about who is powerful or famous. It's about how you treat others, especially when no one else is watching. Humility is strength. Patience is power. And the quiet lessons often resonate the longest. Type respect in the comments if you believe humility is true strength. Share where you're watching from. I want to hear from everyone who values kindness, patience, and integrity in a world that often rushes to judge. Globe showing America's folded hands. Because the real story isn't just on screen. It's in every thoughtful, humble act we carry into our own lives. And sometimes, the quietest presence can leave the loudest impact.